Napoleon Bonaparte, leaving behind a legacy. Towards the end of the 18th century, the turmoil of the French Revolution gave Napoleon Bonaparte a prime opportunity to rise to emperor and change the path of France and Europe. As leader of the revolution, his leadership style held all the major and minor characteristics that made a brilliant leader. Throughout Napoleon's legacy, he was able to change many countries socially, economically, and politically. Napoleon Bonaparte, also known as Napoleon I, was a French military leader and emperor who conquered much of Europe in the early 19th century. Napoleon was born in Ajaccio, Corsica on August 15, 1769 to Carlo Bonaparte, a lawyer and political opportunist, and his wife, Mary Letizia. Napoleon was the second of 8 surviving children. The Bonapartes were members of the Corsican nobility, but they weren't too wealthy. Napoleon was sent to school in France at the age of 8 on a scholarship for the sons of noble families. He was teased for his Corsican accent and poor grasp of French, and gained a reputation as abrupt and different. At a young age, Napoleon preferred to be known as Corsican, and was hostile to French rule. However, Corsican politics forced Napoleon and his family to flee to France in 1793 after getting in an argument with the Corsican governor. In France, Napoleon became associated with Augustin Robespierre, a Jacobin who was a key force behind the Reign of Terror, a period of violence against enemies of the Revolution. During this time, Napoleon was promoted to the rank of brigadier general in the army. However, after Robespierre fell from power and was guillotined in July 1794, Napoleon was briefly put under house arrest for his ties to the brothers. In 1795, Napoleon was promoted to major general after suppressing a royalist insurrection against the revolutionary government in Paris. In 1796, France attacked Austria. Napoleon was given command of the Army of Italy, where he welded a young, starving, and disgruntled army into a force which won victory after victory against the Austrian army. In 1797, France and Austria signed the Treaty of Campo Formio, resulting in territorial gains for the French. The following year, the Directory offered Napoleon to lead an attack against England. Napoleon refused the offer because he believed that Napoleon's naval forces were not ready to go against the superior British Royal Navy. Napoleon suggested that they invade Egypt in an effort to wipe out British trade routes with India. Napoleon's troops won against Egypt's military rulers, the Mamluks, at the Battle of the Pyramids in 1978. However, his forces were stranded after his naval fleet was nearly destroyed by the British at the Battle of the Nile in August 1798. In 1799, Napoleon's army launched an invasion of Ottoman-ruled Syria, which ended with the failed siege of Acre, located in modern-day Israel. That summer, Napoleon opted to abandon his army in Egypt and return to France. In November 1799, an event known as the Coup of 18 Brumaire, Napoleon was a part of a group that successfully overthrew the French Directory. The coup d'etat made him the first consul of France, a practical dictatorship with a constitution wrapped firmly around him. Having set treaties that left Europe at peace, Bonaparte began working on France, reforming the economy, legal system, the famous and enduring Code Napoleon, church, military, education, and government. Bonaparte showed an undeniable skill as both legislator and statesman, but many have argued that his talent was deeply flawed, and even supporters admit that Napoleon made mistakes. The consul's popularity remained high, helped by his mastery of propaganda but also genuine national support. Napoleon was elected consulate for life by the French people in 1802. 2 years later, in 1804, Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of France in a ceremony at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. From 1803 to 1815, France was engaged in the Napoleonic Wars, a series of major conflicts of various coalitions of European nations. In 1803, in means to raise funds for future wars, Napoleon sold France's Louisiana Territory in North America to the United States for $15 million, a transaction that later became known as the Louisiana Purchase. In October 1805, the British wiped out Napoleon's fleet at the Battle of Trafalgar. However, in December of that same year, Napoleon achieved what is considered to be one of his greatest victories at the Battle of Austerlitz, in which his army defeated the Austrians and Russians. The victory resulted in the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire and the creation of the Confederation of the Rhine. Beginning in 1806, Napoleon sought to wage large-scale economic warfare against Britain with the establishment of the so-called continental system of European port blockades against British trade. In 1807, following Napoleon's defeat of the Russians at Friedland in Prussia, Alexander I was forced to sign a peace settlement, the Treaty of Tilsit. In 1809, the French defeated the Austrians at the Battle of Wagram, resulting in further gains for Napoleon. During these years, Napoleon re-established a French aristocracy and began handing out titles of nobility to his loyal friends and family as his empire continued to expand across much of Western and Central continental Europe. In 1810, Russia withdrew from the continental system. In retaliation, Napoleon led a massive army into Russia in the summer of 1812. Rather than engaging the French in a full-scale battle, the Russians adopted a strategy of retreating whenever Napoleon's forces attempted to attack. As a result, Napoleon's troops trekked deeper into Russia despite being ill-prepared for an extended campaign. In September, both sides suffered heavy casualties in the indecisive Battle of Borodino. Napoleon's forces marched on to Moscow, only to discover almost an entire population evacuated. Retreating Russians set fires across the city in an effort to deprive enemy troops of supplies. After waiting a month for a surrender that never came, Napoleon, faced with the onset of the Russian winter, was forced to order his starving, exhausted army out of Moscow. During the disastrous retreat, his army suffered continual harassment from a suddenly aggressive and merciless Russian army. Of Napoleon's 600,000 troops who began the campaign, only an estimated 100,000 made it out of Russia. At the same time as the catastrophic Russian invasion, French forces were engaged in the Peninsular War, which resulted in the Spanish and Portuguese, with assistance from the British, driving the French from the Iberian Peninsula. This loss was followed in 1813 by the Battle of Leipzig, also known as the Battle of Nations, in which Napoleon's forces were defeated by a coalition that included Austrian, Prussian, Russian, and Swedish troops. Napoleon then retreated to France, and in March 1814, coalition forces captured Paris. On April 6, 1814, Napoleon, then in his mid-40s, was forced to abdicate the throne. With the Treaty of Fontainebleau, he was exiled to Elba, a Mediterranean island off the coast of Italy. On February 26, 1815, after less than a year in exile, Napoleon escaped Elba and sailed to the French mainland with a group of more than 1,000 supporters. On March 20th, he returned to Paris, where he was welcomed by cheering crowds. The new king, Louis XVIII, fled, and Napoleon began what came to be known as the 100 Days Campaign. Upon Napoleon's return to France, a coalition of allies, the Austrians, British, Prussians, and Russians, who considered the French emperor an enemy, began to prepare for war. Napoleon raised a new army and planned to strike greatly, defeating the Allied forces one by one before they could launch a united attack against him. In June 1815, his forces invaded Belgium, where British and Prussian troops were stationed. On June 16, Napoleon's troops defeated the Prussians at the Battle of Ligny. However, 2 days later, on June 18, at the Battle of Waterloo near Brussels, the French were crushed by the British, with assistance from the Prussians. On June 22, 1815, Napoleon was once again forced to abdicate. In October 1815, Napoleon was exiled to the remote British-held island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic Ocean. He died there on May 5, 1821, at age 51, most likely from stomach cancer. Napoleon was buried on the island, despite his request to be laid to rest on the banks of the Seine among the French people I have loved so much. In 1840, his remains were returned to France and entombed in a crypt at Les Invalides in Paris, where other French military leaders are interred. Standing only 5'2", Napoleon was both admired and feared through Europe during his reign. His leadership style was considered unorthodox at the time, but today we see that he had all of the major and minor characteristics that make a brilliant leader. Napoleon was a great motivator of the people. From the lowest soldier to the high-ranking generals and aristocrats, Bonaparte knew that in order for him to succeed, he had to have the people around him enthusiastic about their mission. He understood that a leader must win the trust of the people he is leading. Be aware of the thoughts and feelings of those around you. Begin to learn how to persuade people to believe in your cause and adapt to your thinking. If you are confident in your ability to succeed, they will begin to believe in that same ability. As a leader of armies and an emperor, Napoleon was always employing new ways to make things work. On the battlefields, most of the opposing armies were perplexed, but except for his military strategies. They didn't know what to do to combat his maneuvers and formations. He also would fight at odd times of the day, consecutive days, in the snow, rain, sun, night, or whenever he believed he would have an advantage. He began to think about different ways to approach a job or task. No matter how badly they were outnumbered, the soldiers in Napoleon's army knew that Napoleon would find a new and clever way that they would lead to victory. As a leader, you should be on the lookout for new ways to do the same task. All employees, workers, and soldiers want to feel appreciated. Napoleon understood that showing gratitude was a great way to gain the favor of the people. Overall, Napoleon was one of the greatest military leaders that France has ever seen and one of the greatest military leaders that has ever lived on this world.